Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, it's our pleasure to present the 1964 Japanese film Woman in the Dunes, directed by Hiroshi Teshigahara and based upon the novel by Kobo Abe. This film won the jury prize at Cannes, and it's considered one of the great classics of the Japanese New Wave. It's also one of those great modernist films that fits in the tradition of storytelling we associate with Franz Kafka, Samuel Beckett, and Eugene Ionesco. In short, this is an absurdist story that's extraordinary and surprising in a whole set of ways. We'll be sure to talk about that and a lot of other things after today's screening. It's a pleasure to have with us Professor Paul Anderer from Columbia University, an expert on modern Japanese literature and culture, to discuss these issues with us. Now, enter the very strange, visually magnificent world of Woman in the Dunes. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. I hope you've enjoyed this opportunity to look at one of the great Japanese films of the 1960s, Woman in the Dunes. I hope you've had a chance to get a drink of water, because you might be thirsty after this, and brush a little bit of the sand off. We have 30 minutes to talk about this extraordinarily rich film, and it's a pleasure to welcome back to City Cinematheque one of our experts on Japanese literature, culture, and film. Our invitee today is Professor Paul Anderer from Columbia University. Paul has been teaching at Columbia for a number of years in a broad range of courses that have to do with modern Japanese culture, having to do with modern Japanese literature, film, criticism. He's the author of a number of articles and books on the subject, too numerous to name here. Paul, let's start. I don't want to keep us on this as literature, but there is a very important Japanese writer behind this work, and this is the first of several important collaborations between the director Hiroshi Teshigahara and Kobo Abe. Let's recover just a little bit who Abe is and how he fits into modern Japanese literature.
Well, good. Well, thanks, Jerry, for having me back. Abe and Teshigahara, as you mentioned, had a very long and rich creative collaboration. Abe, is known as really one of the great internationally acclaimed novelists of the 20th century. He has a very determinedly, it would seem, experimental, avant-garde style. And, and in that sense, he's usually coded as being somehow modern and experimental before he's even considered Japanese. And he may be the first such Japanese writer about whom, you could say that. But that said, I mean, I think there's, it's worth maybe backing up and looking into something about Abe's history. Sure. He wasn't born on the moon. He wasn't born in Czechoslovakia. He was born in Japan, and but very shortly left Japan because his father was a doctor in the Japanese medical hospital on mainland China.
Okay.
In the colonial regime, as the Japanese were creating it in China. He was born, that is, Abe Kobo, in 1924, but in Tokyo. But he moved at a very young age to China and had then his upbringing in a territory that, strictly speaking, was not Japanese. Okay. I mean, he was living with his family. As I mentioned, his father was a doctor in the employ at the Japanese medical hospital in China. But this marks a rather stunning fact and facet of his background biographically. That is to say, he, and not just in a metaphorical sense, right, left his home and lived outside of Japan longer during his formative years than any other major novelist I can think of the 20th century.
Okay.
So, over the period of his upbringing, I mentioned he was born in 24, through the late 30s anyway, he's in China almost continuously. He comes back to Tokyo for study in the 40s. He contracts what seemed like the early signs. I mean, it looks like he had something like tuberculosis very young. and actually then, and you might think paradoxically, returned to China for treatment in the kind of the mid-40s, around 43, and stayed in China through the conclusion of the war. His father died in 45. Abe and his mother were left, as it were, in this fallen imperial situation because, of course, the war ends, the Japanese Empire is in wholesale collapse.
Right.
But Abe and his mother were left, as it were, behind the lines and had to make their way back, along with many other Japanese in the civilian employ who were trying to get back to Japan. And in fact, one of Abe's first and most, I think, most interesting and important novels was written in the late 40s about that experience. I'm not saying that it was narrowly autobiographical, and it would be loose, but it would be loosely translated as The Beasts Head for Home. And it's about a group of Japanese who are in China at the end of the war trying to find or make their way back to Japan. And they never quite make it. They kind of move in circles and along the way begin to kind of puzzle out what home means, what Japan means in this situation of total collapse.
Well, let me, start to draw some of the parallels, because one of the things that's so fascinating about the film is this question of really what constitutes home.
Sure.
There is a modern Japan that we never see in this film, but from which our protagonist very much comes. He keeps claiming he is from there, but then he talks about his discontent, the way in which he is nobody there. He becomes somebody by collecting bugs and getting a bug named after him. This is a village that is Japanese, but it's a traditional village that is disappearing, quite literally disappearing into the landscape and into the dunes. So all of those questions about being in an alien landscape, learning the customs of others, determining what constitutes your identity and your home, all of those things are really dwelling here. I mean, but with that more overtly allegorical inflection that we find in this in this film.
No, it's great. I mean, as you think back even to the opening credits, you hear the sounds, and the city is probably more palpably present in the credits of the film, right? And you hear Takamitsu bringing up the sounds of trains and whistles and bells and all of that, and there's Tokyo back there. And we understand that this guy is out on a weekend excursion. He's got a few days off. He's a bug collector. He's a teacher, right, in high school, and he's out to make something of a name for himself. He's going to find some new bug out in this, out in this territory, and he's going to make his mark in a textbook somewhere. And he trudges across this terrain, which indeed could be, just about anywhere. It could be the moon.
Yeah, absolutely.
It could be, some territory of, in some corner of Japan. For that matter, it could be a territory somewhere in China.
Absolutely.
But it is extremely abstract and coded, so it invites us to kind of trek along with this weekend traveler, decked out. I mean, he's got sort of his Banana Republic-like almost outfit on. And he's, he's sort of enjoying himself, spying on the insects, right? Catching them in the, in the lens of his, camera. Smile for the camera, little, little bug. And of course, the ironies begin, to proliferate from the very beginning, and we very much understand that this character who's looking very carefully and going to, inspect the ground for a new specimen is the one who's going to wind up in the ground and be the object of, let's say, our scrutiny and capture, and he's going to be, variously positioned and kind of nailed in some very strange environment.
You mentioned somebody. I think it's worth circling back onto the name, because really we've talked about Teshigahara a little bit, though we need to talk a little bit more about his background. Kobo Abe, and then you mentioned Takamitsu, who is Toro Takamitsu, the composer. What relationship does he have to this production and to this group of? Well,
Takamitsu and Abe and Teshigahara were they're profound, I mean, creative, artistic collaborators from this time, but they are among the most in their respective fields. Takamitsu in music, avant-garde composer before he had a hand at composing music for film. Abe as a novelist and Teshigahara as a filmmaker, among the really protean, powerful forces in the post-war arts and in the experimental avant-garde movements in Japan from the 50s through the 60s into the 70s. And as you know, Takamitsu continued to make music right to the end. I mean, he died, I believe, in '95, but did some things for Kurosawa later on in his career, but did some absolutely brilliant things, you know, at this period, and I think truly surpasses himself in a movie like this.
Absolutely, and I think we can, there's two things I want to say. First of all, just to simply recommend to people who are watching the show that there is a very fine documentary about Takamitsu. I know that you actually were probably involved with, even as an advisor, or you knew the filmmakers in that. And that's really one of those documentaries that if people have the opportunity to see it, you can really understand the function of a composer and of an extraordinary artist like this and what he really does contribute. It also brings up this, throws us back a little bit onto the internationalist aspect of this film, because this is much of the music would be discerned as part of an international avant-garde, not necessarily at all moments as coming distinctly Japanese. Let's get back into this, you know, the degree to which this film fits into one grid, which is a grid that people understand from Kafka and Beckett, and then the way in which it fits into a distinctly Japanese grid.
Right, good. Well, as you say, Jerry, I mean, I think that first-time viewers or, you know, repeat viewers might look at this and say, well, here's a species of a, you know, a Kafka kind of parable. Right down, and no doubt Abe is winking in the direction of metamorphosis with his play on insects and bugs, and, you know, these strange transformations that can come over one within, you know, overnight, as it were, and that is exactly what happens to this character. But, you know, at the same time, I think that you can look at this character, this sojourner, trekking along in some kind of, you know, vacant space, right? It's, you know, it happens to be, you know, the dunes, but it could be a mountainscape. And you think back, and there are notations in various other of Abe's novels that he certainly knew no drama, for example. And you think of that lonely, that, you know, that priest wanderer out there in the mountains who's trekking along and happens to stop, right, at some indeterminate place. He's got to rest for the night. And somebody in the area kind of takes him in and takes him into something like a trap. And this priest has to listen for the better part of a night, somebody talk about some nightmare that they've been living with for the better part of 200, 300, 400 years. Well, it seems to me that you can begin to do that. We can begin to do that now, even though, for example, Abe would say, and he was protesting far too much, that, you know, his primary, you know, literary allegiances went out to, in fact, Kafka, Beckett, Dostoevsky, for example. That's all true. But I think we ought not to miss or mistake the, you know, this wilderness of barrenness, this wilderness, you might say, of almost Buddhist illusion. Right? There's a very deep, powerful literature about entrapment and the various ways in which your eye and perception actually plays tricks on you. And the world that you think that is real and there and substantial gives way into some other recognition.
Well, that's a very interesting point you bring up that really draws us into the extraordinary visual style of this film, because there are at least two of those aspects really flow from what you're saying. One of those aspects is that this is one of those films made in the 60s in which black and white is still a choice, not really a strange choice, but it's a choice in filmmaking. And so the capacities of those lenses and film stocks to render effects that, again, move from a kind of a sense of very, very powerful mimesis at one end of the spectrum to very powerful abstraction at the other end of the spectrum. And we're sort of sliding back and forth in what it is, the notion of what we're seeing, and where are we seeing it from? How are we seeing it? Are we seeing it through the lens of his camera? Are we seeing it through an optical point of view shot from him? Or are we seeing it in some sense through the director's choice of shots at those moments? And that's the second aspect. It's not just the visual quality, but this is a film that has stylistically an extraordinary range of shots, from the microscopic close-up to extraordinary long shots. In fact, its vocabulary in that sense is a very, very wide one, and the way in which the editing works is frequently with, if not exactly jump cuts, with unexpected leaps in point of view, and leaps from one proportional view to another, or leaps that make us completely readjust. Well, who is seeing this from what point of view, and why? All of those things, I mean, flow into the character and the story from Teshigahara's stylistics. I think. Let me come back, however, to your point. Why, and this perhaps attaches us to his post-war generation and to the novelist and New Wave filmmakers, why would this denial of Japaneseness be an historically important thing for a Japanese to do at this particular epoch? You know, to attach yourself much more to this and say, I'm not, no, don't think of me that way, think of me this way.
Right. Well, as I mentioned, a couple of things. I mean, Abe is much more extreme than most others in saying he absolutely owes nothing at all to Japanese tradition.
Okay.
And then, of course, he'll often, he'll say, too, that he was, and he'll backtrack and talk a little bit about his biography and say, and this has a lot to do with the fact that I never really had a home. I didn't really have a settlement. I never grew up understanding what Japanese city life or country life was really like, because I was an outsider to it.
Okay.
And, that said, I think that there, you also get this sense that, that he's very much, and however much he's kind of universalizing and kind of abstracting the situation, he's nevertheless kind of reflecting and pondering on the way in which, let's say, various ideologies and slogans, my homeism, among other things. I mean, the ideology and the rhetoric of home was very much a part of the 1930s.
Right.
And community spirit, and everybody kind of pitching in and helping and working towards some common purpose, even though in this film, right, we understand that the common purpose is to sell this bad sand, this waterlogged sand, to city construction projects, which are bound to bring down that city. Yeah. So there's built into into this I think running commentary, this sense that ideology and ideas have really led to serious kinds of entrapments of individuals and of nations. And I think Abe is reflecting, indeed, not just on Japanese historical experience in that regard, and not at the other end, just some abstract, universal, globalized, but in fact situations that he encountered on the mainland of China. Right? In a kind of wasteland, in a kind of dead zone as it was after the war, foraging around for food as he had to, so that his mother and he could survive. I think there's something of that. There's something of that forager in this character, Nikki Junpei. I mean, that he's out there kind of looking for something, scraping the ground as if it contained clues, actually for some kind of strange survival. But you can't get at it straightforwardly. And it brings me back, I mean, as you said, this is hyper-intensive camera work, and it's, and it's done with, extraordinary delicacy and detail. And, from the beginning, I think we're tipped off that, that seeing what we see and how we see it is crucial to the way in which we imagine the world and imagine new possibilities, or we find ourselves trapped into depths from which we can never recover.
And I think, just to follow up on your point there, that also has to do with the structure of the work, in that some of the shots are motivated we're always following him. Some of them are motivated by his perceptions, but also other shots are motivated. Sometimes it's the observation of the woman, but also, you know, there is again this non-personified directorial presence. That is, that there is a way in which he is very much being observed as well, that where there's a distance between his experience and how at times his experience is being observed, because while on the one hand the film is, you know, sympathetic to the fact that he's discovering he's being trapped, I think most people, you know, even the first time, are ahead of him, because the film wants you to be ahead of him at certain moments, saying, don't you think it's a little bit odd you're going down into a sand pit?
Yeah.
You know, on this, and then at certain points, of course, he gets ahead of us. It's structured in the sense of, well, wait a minute, now he's having a different attitude towards this. I don't understand that, and we have to be filled in on either whether it be his strategy to escape, the way in which he set that up, or later, the way in which he's then converted to his interest because of the discovery of the water, and the way in which there may actually be something here of interest to him as a scientist.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, at a variety of levels. I mean, this is a film about texture more than it is, you know, I think a film actually about ideas or ideology or any kind of conversion like that. And I think that, among other things, the film wants us to experience something like the sense world, which may have otherwise seemed, as it were, beyond the point, given, you know, the enormous, let's say, convulsions of the 20th century. But among other things, this is a very elemental film. It wants us to look at very basic properties of the world in which we live, the world we trek over step by step, as well as you know, certain elements of immediate contact, such as individual human beings can have toward one another. And that, of course, you know, has something to do with this relationship between the man and the woman in the dunes. This is not, you know, you know, we're not talking about a bug in the dunes, we're not talking about the Chamber of Commerce in the dunes, but we're talking about a woman and the apprehension of that woman by the camera, by this man, by this collectivity, this anonymous audience, who's variously, as you say, one step ahead, but who knows, some of us may feel we're also one step behind. Right? And a lot of us end this film feeling we're several steps behind, trying to puzzle out, well, just what exactly has happened? Is this some Marxist fable? Is it an existentialist parable? What are the politics here, if there are, you know, an articulate politics? And
well, I think you bring up a very interesting point there. This film is what I call sometimes an open allegory. That is, with certain kinds, and this, I mean, certainly someone like Kafka is working in this tradition, and Beckett, I mean, the people we've already mentioned, but, you know, in the traditional allegories, you go through one level and you are there, and then you go to a determinate second level. In The Pilgrim's Progress by Bunyan, or any number of the classic allegories, you know exactly what the relationship is. But in these modernist or postmodernist open allegories, you always know that first level is there, you have to go through it, but then the second level, you know that there's a second or third or fourth, but its determinacy is really not clamped down. And so, you know, you're, as you put it so well, Paul, you know, this notion of, well, is this really a Marxist parable? Is this a Freudian parable about rediscovery of eroticism or of some zone of the consciousness? One could do a whole, you know, rock and roll about, you know, pits and symbols and this kind of stuff. And the point is that the film won't clamp down on any single one of those interpretations. It keeps leading us to keep interpreting in that way. But let's go back to a specific element of it. And I want to introduce that with a classic figure of speech used by the Russian formalists, the so-called the Russian formalist once said, our problem in recovering the world is that we experience the world through glass armor. It's there, but somehow there's the glass, and our problem is breaking that glass armor to recover what's the real felt experience. Let's talk about that in regard to the importance of eroticism in this film. Because again, at the time of the film's release, I think its eroticism was at least as famous a feature as its allegorical functions, as its cinematography, as Abe's presence. How does eroticism function within this film and this narrative?
Well, I think it's a, it's not a, a simple, straightforward eroticism in the sense that it is not only the woman who is framed as this, object of, let's say, some desiring gaze, whether it's the cameras or the sojourner who happens to be with her against his will or otherwise at the beginning. As we think about it, there are as many kind of framings of the male nude as there are of the female nude, and and in that sense, the eroticism has a way of moving actually through these individuals as they connect, as they do in two marvelous scenes, but mediated through these other properties, these properties of wetness and dryness, these flows that are that are taking place, no doubt between. It's an energy flow and an erotic flow, no doubt, between the man and the woman, but it's a circuit that doesn't stop there. It flows out into the world, and it almost replenishes, we might say to a hallucinatory degree, the sand. But there is that sense of a kind of almost a water of life that's out there in the sand. Again, if you have sufficient powers of imagination, or will, you might say, self or collective delusion. But the point is, you feel at certain points of that film almost redeemed by qualities that the filmmaker is bringing to this what would seem a dry and desiccated environment, and suddenly it's liquid and flowing. And it has these, marvelously almost restorative properties. Now, to be sure, you can't kind of luxuriate in that. And as you said at the beginning, I mean, many people feel like, they want a deep glass of water after they finish this film, or they're going to stay away from the beaches for a while.
That's right.
So there is that other part of it, and you have to work through a lot that is truly dry and desiccated and dusty to get to that. But you do get to that. And of course, the thing that represents his, as it were, ticket to ride, right, at least in terms of his own, sense of having gained some kind of leverage over this necessitous condition, is the discovery he doesn't capture a crow, but he does start to collect water. Okay.
We're going to have to end on the note of the collection of water, and there's a lot more to be mined in this film, if I can use that, but we're going to have to leave that up to the audience as they continue. If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque or this series, please drop us a line. Drop it to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Let me give you that information again. Drop us a line to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Paul, always a pleasure to have you here. I look forward to having you back when we're doing things Japanese again.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks.
Great. And I hope that you continue to join us as we try to explore the archives of film history and that wonderful audiovisual world out there. Thanks for joining us today in any case. Bye-bye for now.